where the Allies would land. Despite the concentration of air attacks in southern Italy, there were indications that the main Allied landings would take place in Greece or in Sardinia. Greece was garrisoned by an Italian army of occupation, recently reinforced by the 1st Panzer Division, transferred from France. In Italy, there were 3 armies, one of which, the 6th, was wholly concentrated in Sicily. 6th Army was supported by 2 German divisions, the 15th Panzer Grenadiers and the Hermann Göring Panzer Division. In Sardinia, the Italian garrison was supported by the 90th Panzer Grenadiers, and in nearby Corsica, the 16th SS Panzer Grenadiers were forming up. In northern Italy, Hitler established German Army Group B, with a further 3 German divisions to coordinate all German forces in Italy. This command would eventually become the German 10th Army. These then were the principal forces available to Hitler on the eve of the Allied attack. He had little confidence in his Italian ally and expected his thinly spread German formations to intervene quickly and decisively wherever the landings took place. Like most British generals, Harold Alexander first saw action with the British Expeditionary Force in France. As commander of the 1st Division, he was charged with organising the retreat and evacuation of the force from the Dunkirk beaches. Alexander's rearguards held the line during the final days of the evacuation and were amongst the last British troops to leave the beach. In 1942, after service in England and then in Burma, he was appointed Commander-in-Chief, Middle East. In this capacity, Alexander had overall responsibility for General Montgomery's offensive at El Alamein and shared a lot of the credit for the victory. In February 1943, Alexander was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the 15th Army Group in Tunisia. Alexander's conduct of the Tunisian campaign was exemplary, and his tact and impartiality were decisive in settling inter-Allied disputes. In the final weeks of the Tunisian campaign, Alexander used his material superiority to bring to battle all the component forces of the military alliance. This ensured that the victory honours were shared equally, and that untested formations were given valuable battle experience in preparation for future campaigns on the continent of Europe. After a brilliant career in the German army during the interwar years, Albert Kesselring transferred to the Luftwaffe, rising to become the service's most powerful and important officer after Hermann Göring, Hitler's appointed deputy and the Luftwaffe's commander-in-chief. As Chief of Staff from 1936, Kesselring was largely responsible for the military effectiveness of the Luftwaffe at the outbreak of war, and subsequently commanded powerful German air fleets in Poland and the West. During the Battle of Britain, Kesselring commanded the principal German air fleet, and came very close to defeating the RAF. In 1942, Kesselring was promoted to Field Marshal and appointed Commander-in-Chief South, with overall responsibility for all German operations in the Mediterranean and North Africa. Kesselring's unique understanding of both air and ground forces enabled him to coordinate their use properly, achieving results sometimes quite out of proportion to his limited resources. This was particularly true in Tunisia, where the Luftwaffe held tactical air superiority for much of the campaign. Kesselring's inner confidence and professionalism, combined with a razor-sharp mind, made him a truly formidable opponent. In Italy, commanding both ground and air forces, he would conduct a faultless campaign, gradually withdrawing northwards and exacting a huge price for every Allied gain. By the early summer of 1943, there were more than 500,000 Allied servicemen in the Mediterranean theatre. This huge force included divisions from 7 nations. Most of these were British or American and had taken part in the battle for Tunisia, but the force also included divisions from French North Africa, New Zealand and India, and 2 fresh Canadian divisions were in the process of assembling and training for the Italian campaign. A Polish corps of 2 divisions was also being formed. Most of its recruits had suffered imprisonment in the Soviet Union following the defeat and division of Poland in 1939. But after Germany's attack on Russia in June 1941, the survivors had been released from captivity and assembled in southern Russia under the command of the veteran Polish general Władysław Anders. From there, they had made their way south, across the Russian frontier, first to Persia and then to Iraq. There they were supplied and trained by the British in preparation for the Italian campaign. Training programs for all the Allied forces were generally much more thorough and focused than they had been in the past. In particular, amphibious operations were rehearsed extensively. Many of the setbacks suffered by the Allies in French North Africa had been due to inadequate preparation and poor training. Boat handling and assault landings in Morocco and Algeria had been dangerously flawed. More than 50% of the assault boats had been lost on the first day, and only the quick capitulation of the French defenders had prevented a catastrophe. By comparison, the naval forces had performed superbly, and naval gunfire in support of ground forces had been much more effective in North Africa than Allied planners had expected. For the invasion of Sicily, by far the most hazardous enterprise yet undertaken by the Allies, adequate naval support would be essential, and a force of more than 250 warships would be employed to cover and support the landings. The American M4 battle tank entered production in 1942 and utilized many of the proven features of its predecessor, the M3, such as the chassis, hull, engine and transmission system. But the 75mm gun was mounted in a fully traversable turret with a consequent height reduction of 15 inches. With greater armor protection, a reduced profile and a more effective gun mounting, the M4 was the first